Hey guys, so today I'm doing my October wrap up. I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read this month, and as usual I'm going to start with my least favourite book that I read and work my way up to my most favourite. So probably my least favourite book that I read this month was a 3-star read, and that was Nightmares by Jason Segel and Kirsten Miller. This is a middle grade fantasy kind of novel. You can kind of tell by the cover that it's scary-ish. It's about a boy called Charlie. His mum passed away when he was a little bit younger, and his dad has remarried this woman who Charlie thinks is a witch, and they move into her house, which is a really like notable house in the town. It's really old and really spooky looking, and it's painted bright purple. So yeah, he basically thinks she's a witch and he thinks there's something sinister going on. He keeps having these nightmares about witches, and he's kind of convinced that it's somehow real. First of all, I really liked the illustrations in this book, like this one, which is his stepmother going into the fridge, just kind of showing like how Charlie sees her as like this evil witch lady. And then there is this as well, which is something that I posted on Twitter because I just thought it's so creepy. They're like little fluffy bunny rabbits but with these really big teeth and no eyes. Very cool. I really liked the illustrations in this. I think it added a lot to the story, and I feel like it's something that the like middle grade audience would really enjoy as well. I really enjoyed the first half of this book, which is the part that is set like in the real world. I was getting really into it. I quite liked where the story was going between Charlie and his stepmother, and yeah, all of those real world elements were really good. But then the second half of the book mostly takes place in Charlie's nightmares, which is kind of like a different world, and I just didn't enjoy it so much. The characters were just quite flat for me. Charlie and his stepmother were the only ones that felt like they had any development, and so I didn't really feel connected to anybody else, and the rest of the story just felt kind of like boring. The storyline as it played out kind of reminded me of Monsters Inc. a little bit, and I wondered if they were perhaps inspired by Monsters Inc. because it had a very similar sort of idea behind it. The other book that I gave 3 stars this month is one that I've already returned to the library, Our Own Private Universe by romantasy. This one I gave 3 stars as well. It's about a girl called Aki. They make a big deal about how she pronounces it. It looks like you would say Aki, but she pronounces it Aki. She goes on a church mission kind of trip to Mexico, and it's with a lot of young people. It just kind of follows like what they do on that trip and her kind of exploring her sexuality a little bit. She identifies as bi, and she forms a connection with a girl while they're over there. It was a great book in a lot of ways. Like in a lot of ways it really impressed me and was really amazing. I think its dealings with sexuality were really great and really in-depth. There were even discussions about safe sex, which we never really see in YA, which we should see more of, so that was really cool. There was also some debate over really important like global issues, which I thought was really interesting as well that they included that. Just shows young people like do care about these things, so I really liked that element of the book as well. And what I most appreciated, I think, was the way that the book showed that not necessarily everyone is going to see things the same way you do. You kind of assume sometimes that your view is like the obvious one, and the book really questions that and shows that just because you feel really strongly about something or something seems really obvious to you, other people who have had different experiences have a different way of seeing the world, and I think it explored that idea really well. However, the story itself was actually really boring to me. I just feel like nothing happens in this book. Everything that's like drama is just the result of people lying their asses off. Everyone in this book lies so much, and if they all stopped lying for 5 seconds, they wouldn't have had any problems whatsoever, really. Like there was really nothing going on aside from people lying to each other. So I really didn't like that aspect of it. I just found it really dull. Nothing happens. But like I said, there were really good parts to this book as well. Moving on to my 4-star reads, because there were a bunch of those this month. I really enjoyed a lot of them. The first one I've kind of already talked about a little bit, but that was A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J Maas. This is the second book in the A Court of Thorns and Roses trilogy series. It's a series now. When I was at the very beginning of this book, I was really not enjoying it, and I think the reason that I wasn't was just because after A Court of Thorns and Roses, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I just expected things to go a certain way and they didn't go that way, and Feyre was really unhappy and that just made me really unhappy. And I know it was only the beginning of the book, so I should have like thought that obviously things were going to get better, but I kind of was just like, I don't like this, but I kept reading and it got better. I think Feyre goes through a really incredible character development. I was really impressed by that. I also really liked seeing the Night Court and like all these other places. I just love the setting of this book so much. It's probably one of my favorite settings ever. I changed the desktop background on my laptop to like a night court-ish looking scene because I just fell in love with it so much. I take back every bad thing I ever said about Rhys after reading A Court of Thorns and Roses. I really didn't like him. I grew to like him a lot in this book. I think all of his like friends are really awesome characters as well. All of them have their own like backstories and they're really well developed, and you feel like you really get to know them and become like friends with them as well, which I really enjoyed. Yeah, so overall I ended up really enjoying this book. It surprised me. It did feel quite long. I felt like the story was dragged out a bit and there are patches where it just feels like nothing's really happening. And also, as you might have guessed from my video that I made earlier this month, the sex scenes in this book are just super uncomfortable for me. It's not something that I enjoy reading, so there was that as well. My next 4-star book was 10 by Gretchen McNeal. This is a YA like thriller horror mystery kind of book. It's like kind of a slasher type thing. If you've ever seen like Scream, it's like that type of idea. It very much reminded me of Party Games by R.L. Stine. That is one of, I think it's the first book in the Fair Street relaunch series. In that one, a bunch of teens go on a boat to an island for a party with some of their friends from school, and it's like the popular kids, so they're really stoked to be invited, but then all this weird stuff starts happening and people start dying. This book has a very similar storyline. A girl and her friend who aren't super cool get invited to a super cool party on an island with some people from their school, and there's people from other schools going as well, and they take a boat to get there, and then people start dying. So it's a very similar premise, but I really like that premise, so yeah, that was a good thing for me. I don't want to say too much about it because I don't want to spoil it if you want to read it, which I really recommend. It was so much fun. I was legitimately scared in parts and I had no idea who was responsible for this. Like, I didn't guess the killer at all. It really surprised me. There were a lot of like twists and turns that surprised me, which I liked because I felt like it was predictable when I was reading it, but I was wrong. And the best thing about it is that everything like adds up and makes sense in the end. Like, you haven't been able to guess it at all, but it still like adds up and makes sense, which I think is a really good thing about a horror novel when they can do that, because sometimes you get to the end and you're like, okay, cool, I didn't, either you guessed it or like you're like, I didn't guess it, but that doesn't make any sense, like it's completely random. So it wasn't either of those, which I was really impressed by. My final 4-star read was such a good one. It's Dangerous Girls by Abigail Huss. This is another YA thriller mystery type of novel. It is indeed very similar to With Malice by Eileen Cook, which I read I think last month maybe. It's about a girl and a bunch of her friends. They go on holiday to Aruba. They're in high school, but in Aruba you can like drink at a younger age and all that kind of thing, so they're kind of there to have like a bit of a party and everything. And one of the girls, called Elise, ends up being murdered, and Anna becomes the main suspect for that murder, so she ends up in prison in Aruba awaiting trial. This book kind of darts back and forth. It has like a non-linear sort of plot line, which I really liked. I think it was done really well, used really effectively. It flits back and forth between when Elise and Anna first met and how their friendship developed and everything, their trip and what went on there. It shows you Anna in prison and it shows you the trial itself. There's a huge focus obviously on the justice system and the whole like process of the trial, which is always really interesting to me. It's something I really like reading about, and it was just super tense and super chilling. By the time I got to the end of this book, I was just about pacing around the room because I felt so tense. I felt like I was in Anna's shoes completely. I was so concerned for her that she was going to be sent to prison, and I still didn't understand like what had happened, and it's just amazing. It all like comes together in the end and it's completely chilling and crazy. It was just brilliant, and honestly I'm so glad I read it, and I think everyone else should read it as well. I did have 2 5-star reads this month, which is awesome. The first one was Wake by Elizabeth Knox. This is an adult horror-ish novel. It's about a small town in New Zealand where everyone is mysteriously overcome by madness, so they go crazy, they kind of turn into zombies filled with rage, and they are, you know, basically trying to kill each other. The town ends up getting cut off from the rest of civilization, so no one's coming to help them basically, and no one can leave. And there's a small group of survivors that band together and try to figure out like what to do and what's going on. First of all, I really liked the setting. I love books when they're set in New Zealand. It's just so satisfying to read something that you can sort of picture happening in your own backyard, because there's references to things like Kakapo and Powerade and LMP. Obviously, like, it's a big like plot line, there's a lot to it, but there is a lot of focus on the survivors, like all these different characters. There's quite a number of them. I want to say there's like 10 survivors, maybe there's more than that. And at first I was kind of scared that I would be overwhelmed by all these characters and not remember who's who, or like thinking that they wouldn't each get enough development, but they really do. It kind of reminded me of Lost, because it's similar sort of concept, like these survivors are banding together in a really unusual situation, but they all have their own experiences and backgrounds and stuff that make them deal with that situation so differently to one another. And there's a huge variety of like ages as well. The youngest is a teenage boy, he's 15, and then the oldest is an elderly woman, and everyone in between as well, men and women, and they all have very different backgrounds. The whole horror aspect of it was really good as well. There are some really graphic, disgusting scenes in this, but not in a way that, it's normally not something that appeals to me. I can't stand that kind of like gore type stuff, but it was done in a way that kind of, it wasn't like glorified or like sadistic. It was just like these things were happening. They were in a really dangerous sort of situation and weren't sure if they were safe and that kind of thing. It was very like tense. As seems to be usual with Elizabeth Knox, I've read one of her other books called Dream Hunter, and she seems to do a lot with language. She really plays around with words that have multiple meanings and things like that. It's really interesting. I love how she focuses in on language like that and really like plays with it. I feel like I'm not doing this book justice because it's so good. If you like the idea of that premise, honestly pick this book up, because I think you'll really like it. The only thing that I thought was a little bit questionable is that there's one character who is one of the survivors who's a complete outsider. He doesn't sort of band together with them, he kind of just appears once in a while, so they are quite wary of him. They think he's a suspicious kind of character. They don't know if he has something to do with everything that's happened or if he's dangerous or anything like that. He was described sometimes as the black man, and I just, that whole thing, I wish she hadn't have done that, because it's just something that I don't really understand what the purpose of that was, aside from laziness and like stereotyping in a really terrible way, which happens all too often. And it just reminded me of another book by New Zealand author Maurice Guy called The Fat Man, and the fat man in that book is like the bully, like really terrible character, and it's just lazy characterization to take these things that have no significance in terms of someone's like personal character, you know, these outward things that don't mean anything, and to try and just use lazy stereotypes that completely aren't true and are really horrible to characterize people, I just think is lazy and silly, and she shouldn't have done that. But aside from that, this book is incredible and amazing, and I definitely think everyone should read it. Last book that I'm going to talk about that I read this month was a 5-star read and definitely completely amazing, and would recommend it to everyone. It's A List of Cages by Robin Rowe. This is a YA contemporary. It's quite a heavy sort of one. There's an aeroplane, that's why I'm looking outside. It's a heavy sort of one. A boy who goes to school and runs into his ex-foster brother, and the ex-foster brother is now living with an uncle, and it's just kind of about them like reforming their friendship and looking out for each other and that kind of thing. I would definitely throw out a trigger warning for child abuse. If that's something that you cannot handle reading about, then don't read this book, but it is phenomenal and deals with the issue, I think, really impactfully. It really looks at the way like the smallest, tiniest little actions can have a really huge impact on someone else. I really loved Adam as a character. He's the older of the two boys who's looking out for the younger one. I just thought he was lovely. He is a character with ADHD as well, which is something that I've never really seen represented in YA, so I thought that was a really cool thing to include, and he was just such a lovely guy, and I'm so glad that there is a character that exists like Adam. I just thought this book was lovely all around, even though it deals with really horrible, heavy topics. I just think the overall, you know, bond between the two boys was really lovely, and this book made me cry, and it's just amazing. Like, read it. So those are all of the books that I read this month. If you've read any of them, leave me your thoughts in the comments down below, and I honestly basically encourage you guys to read all of these books, especially the ones I rated 4 and 5 stars, because they were all great, and I think all of you guys would really enjoy all of them, especially Wake and especially A List of Cages. Thank you guys for watching this. I'll see you with another video in a couple days, which will probably be my November TBR. Thanks for watching. Bye.